you really need to slice off what makes the story so compelling, because that, again, will be next in the topic summary. You need to be able to be super clear about what's going to be in the movie, not why the movie is interesting. Hi, it's Spade from Storyteller Therapy. This is the podcast where I give the practical, emotional, and mental support for storytellers working in careers or working on careers in film and television. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Comment below your thoughts or questions about the content. This podcast is also available on Apple iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. All right, let's get started. I'm Spade Robinson, and this is Storyteller Therapy. Bonjour! It is Thursday. You know what that means? It's time for another episode of Storyteller Therapy avec moi. Today is our third and final iteration of the series on documentary storytelling or prepping for your documentary. So far, we've talked about genre and how that influences your approach to your documentary. We've talked about creating or developing a sample for your documentary, mainly for funding. And today we're going to talk about how to talk about your documentary. What language should you be using to articulate what it is that you want to do? Usually it's in written form as you're writing a written proposal for your film and giving that to funders and or partners that are going to work with you. So without further ado, let's dig right in. But before we do that, let's first check in. I've already talked to you about this film. It's a beautiful, personal film about the filmmaker's journey as she captures herself on camera with her struggle with chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a beautiful film that I think really boils down to a love story, actually, between her and her husband and how they maneuver this huge change in their lives as newlyweds. The film, of course, broadens to expose chronic fatigue syndrome, how the dealing of it within the medical community has had a lot of sexism involved and a lot of not believing women when they say there's something wrong. Also, it exposes us to cases of people who have this all around the world and how it's been mistreated and misdiagnosed. So I'm saying all that to say, I think I talked about this film on this podcast before. It's a beautiful film. You should see it. It's on Netflix right now. There's no reason why you shouldn't see it. But the reason why I'm bringing it up again is because the filmmaker, her name is Jennifer Brea. She's absolutely brilliant. The way that she talked about her film from beginning until now, all the way up until the time it was shortlisted for an Academy Award, is nothing short of spectacular. And it's something that I am going to task you with in terms of finding the material, finding the interviews, she also did a TED Talk, finding the way that she talked about the film, the language that she used, the artistic terms, the personal terms, the storytelling terms that really boiled down what the film is about and gave it such an emotional core that really, I think, catapulted the film. The film is already a beautiful movie, but I think what took it to the next level is how Jennifer positioned the film. And that is what we are going to dig into today. So let's get into our therapy session. I think the perfect tool to use for today's podcast is the proposal checklist by Sundance Institute. So as you know, I used to work for the Sundance Documentary Fund, and we spent a lot of time developing a proposal checklist for three main reasons. We wanted to get all the information that we needed out of the filmmaker within their proposal so we didn't have to go back and forth. Like what is everything I need to know about your film in order to make an educated decision whether I want to fund it or not? The second reason is to prompt the filmmaker with questions that they need to be asking themselves in order to make a successful film. The third reason is to position their written proposal in a way where they don't have to write it and rewrite it over and over again, because all of the funders sort of in this nonprofit artist support space basically all need to know the same things. So how do we develop a tool that's going to help you to write a proposal that you can use over and over and over again? You don't have to write it multiple times as you're applying for multiple opportunities. The first thing that I want to go over, even before we start digging into the proposal checklist, one of the emotional reactions that a lot of artists have when it's time to fill out a proposal. I myself have this reaction. It's this weird, hesitant feeling when it comes to somebody asking you what your film is about, or asking you to explain the story, or asking you to explain why you're the person to tell the story, or a lot of those details that come along with writing these things. It's not that it feels invasive, it just feels like an inappropriate question, like someone's asking you something very personal. The amount of emotional work that it takes to dig in there, find the answer to what they're asking, which sometimes is a feeling and less of something that you've really articulated already, then pull it out and then make it pleasant, make it coherent to another person, put it into words that you know that other person or other parties will definitely be able to understand, somehow triggers a lot of us. So here's my tip for that. When you're answering a question like, tell me about your film, or tell me about yourself, or tell me about your project, or what is the blank of this project, what is the social context of this project, or what is the structure of the project, or whatever it is that the question is, I would suggest that you go in and really answer those questions for yourself. One thing that I like to do is I tend to be a lot better with conversation than I do with sitting down at a computer and writing about. So what I'll do is have a conversation with someone about it and record it, or have a conversation with someone about it and take notes of what I'm saying. I think sometimes you can be surprised by the way that you're able to articulate your own project, and then go back and answer those questions using that language. What you won't be able to avoid is the psychological and emotional work that it takes to be vulnerable enough to do that. It's not a stumbling block for everyone, but for the people who it is a stumbling block, that's something that you have to do. Okay, now that that's done, let us jump into the documentary fan proposal checklist. So what we're going to do is go through each section of the proposal checklist. I will describe how to go about answering these questions or going into these different sections so that you are able to articulate the most compelling version of your story. I will also leave a link to this very same checklist in the show notes. So don't worry about following along. Let's just jump right on in. So the very first thing is a log line. It says 2 to 3 sentences, provide a brief, catchy summary of your story. What I really like about creating log lines, I'm actually really good at this, is the rhythm or cadence that you're able to create with your log line. This is a log line that I made up, but it uses the same formula, and it's easy to understand when I use it. So this is the log line. A shark in heat undergoes a dramatic transformation in order to find the most beautiful shark to mate with. Basically what it does is it tells you what journey they're on, and hopefully that's a really compelling journey, what they do while they're on that journey, and what they hope the outcome is to be, or what the outcome is. That may seem like an oversimplification of this process, but the idea is to use that same cadence and begin your log line off with something that drops us into the world of your project. If you describe what world we're going to be in when this single mother, or when this 2-time Academy Award winner, or when this 3-time parolee gang member is in this situation, then I understand how high the stakes are for that person. And then I explain what their obstacle is or what they're up against. So if I have this 3-time parole gang member who is up against his last chance, then I have, of course, like what he's willing to gain or what he's willing to lose, which are the stakes. The stakes are what can be lost and what can be gained. So if this person in this situation is up against this thing, they will have to decide this thing. I hope that's really clear, but the most important thing is that even if you don't follow that formula, which I think is a really simple one if you're struggling with putting together your log line, that third part of it that describes what the stakes are, what your character in this world is up against, and then what there is to win or lose, that is the most important thing. And if you put your log line within that formula and you realize the thing that is to be win or lost, which is the stakes, isn't compelling enough or doesn't feel urgent enough or doesn't feel intense enough, then you want to revisit where on the timeline your story happens. That's why some of these tools can help you tell your story, because they can tell you whether your story is working or interesting enough the way that you have it right now. So if your stakes feel low or just sort of feel kind of ho-hum, then you have to renegotiate. Is your story in a place where you need to go into production? Probably not. Okay, so then what would be the high stakes of the situation? So if you're following a character right now where nothing's really happening, but something happened to them 10 years ago and they're going around doing talks around the country, that's not very interesting, even if they had a really interesting life. So maybe, perhaps, as opposed to following them today, you want to do a historical documentary because that's where everything happened. So the next thing is the story summary, which I think people get confused a lot with the topic summary. So I'm just going to read what it says. What is your story and story structure? Give an overview of your story, introducing the main characters and potential plot points. Describe the anticipated story structure and narrative trajectory or potential character arcs for your project. Discuss your access to the story and characters. Listen, the key is to be super clear here. I think a lot of people get caught up in using like very sexy language. This is not a screenplay. This is not a novel. I don't care. The most important thing for me to know in the story summary is what is the beginning, middle, and end, or potential beginning, middle, and end of your movie, and how do you know? So what's the movie? How do you know? That's the story summary. I don't need the context here. I don't need what happened 2,000 years ago that influences the story. That's next in the topic summary. I want to know if your story is about Mary, who's a single mother, and she's going through this thing. You really need to slice off what makes this story so compelling, because that, again, will be next in the topic summary. You need to be able to be super clear about what's going to be in the movie, not why the movie is interesting. So if this single mother is going to be on this journey, then just tell me the journey. Not like her husband left her and her mother's husband left her mother and her grandfather left her grandma and this generational thing. That's not important right now, because guess what? That's not on camera. Unless your movie is one long interview, which, Lord have mercy, I hope not. What's on camera is going to be you following this mother teach her daughter how to become a ballet dancer. That's the movie that you're making. In the story summary, you're going to tell me, we meet Mary, she lives in this tiny apartment in New York, and she is a choreographer. Her husband has just left her, and she is teaching her daughter to have self-confidence through ballet dance. And there's this recital coming up. The stakes are high because her daughter could either get into the company or not get into the company. If her daughter does not get into the company, then not only is she not going to have a job after high school, but she also it's going to shatter all the hopes that she's put into building her confidence back after her father left. You've explained what's going to be in the movie. What am I actually going to see when I watch your film? Next, you're going to discuss your access. I have unlimited access to these characters. I have moved into the basement of their tiny apartment building, and I'm shooting with them every day. I also have unlimited access to the ballet school. All of my releases are signed. I've even gotten access to the father, who now lives in Canada, and he has agreed to let me come spend the weekend with him and his new wife. Bam. That is all I need to know. I hope that's super clear, because I think when you're looking for funding, you're not enticing people to watch your movie. You sent the sample. I'm already going to watch whatever it is that you have. You're not sexifying it. You're trying to clarify what I'm going to see, because when you're sending your sample, a lot of times it's a clip or a trailer, which we talked about, which is not good, but a sample, a scene, or something like that. And the story summary is going to clarify your vision for the movie and what I am funding. What is the movie going to be when you are done, at least to the best of your ability. And if you don't have the access, you can talk about how you're going about getting the access. If you are still not understanding where the story is going to end up, because life is life and this is real life and you don't know what's going to happen, you do want to set up the stakes, which is the most important thing. You don't know what's going to happen in the future, because nobody knows the future, but you hopefully know what the stakes are, which means you know what there is to be won or lost in your film. If you haven't really thought of what there is to be won or lost, then you need to rethink the structuring of your movie so you're not shooting for a very long time and using a ton of time and a ton of resources. The topic summary is, in short, the context. So I'm going to read it to you. It says, why is this topic important, timely, or relevant? Why are you the best person to make the film about this? Explain the cultural or social relevance and context for the topic and why this project is timely or urgent. Detail the topics, issues, themes, challenges, stakes, or questions that your project will cover. I am going to simplify all of that for you. Essentially, that means, why does this matter? You're making this film about this person or these people or this movement or this place going through this thing. Either it's a meditation on people in this convalescent home, or it's this college student, this first generation college student about to go off to school, or this movement that's happening in the middle of Nepal where these bricklayers are putting down their bricks and standing up for their rights. Whatever it is, this section is about telling me about why that's important. So that's where all of the historical, social, political context comes in. You explain. If we're having a movie about this single mom and this ballerina, then you explain the generational context to why this is so heavy on this mother and why it's so important that she does this for her daughter and for herself. But also beyond this family, which is the leap a lot of filmmakers don't make. Beyond this family, this type of thing is important for this larger reason. So this is where your statistics come in. All of these mothers in Brooklyn are dealing with the same thing. Or mothers who happen to be living in these conditions or in this situation tend to end up in something that's not good. Their children end up less going to college, or their children end up choosing smarter careers as opposed to a career in the arts, or whatever. This is where you bring in the more nuanced perspective about this movement and about this character and about our society at large, because that is what it's going to boil down to. If you're able to connect the movie that you're making with humanity at large and who we are as people on this planet, you have elevated your film contextually so that I can understand why this is so important. That's what this section is all about. You want to be really clear about that. I think that a lot of statistics sometimes get lost, but I think if you as a filmmaker can take a very granulated perspective of your movie and enlarge it and elevate it to humanity, this film sort of boils down to women having a legacy in a way that they've never really had before because it was a shame to get a divorce or whatever. That broader theme, what I always encourage filmmakers to do is figure out what is the very personal reason why you're making this film. When you figure out the very personal reason because of what it speaks to in you as a human being, then I think you're going to get a lot closer to answering that question. And yes, be able to go on and on and on and on about why it's important. Please don't. But once you know, you can say, essentially, this is about, and then a blanketed theme that makes so much sense. The next section is project stage. This is self-explanatory pretty much, but I'm going to read it to you. It says, explain the current status of the project, outline the projected production timeline from the project's current state to the anticipated completion date. Your timeline should cover both the creative and production processes and should detail major project activities, production schedules, and anticipated post-production and release dates. If you have applied before, please share how your project has progressed since the last time you've applied. You want to be able to articulate where you are. Usually when you apply to one of these things, you say, I'm in development, I'm in production, I'm in post-production. Okay, so beyond that, you want to go into detail about where the project is. Those dates are going to be flexible, but the key is that you need to know more than you need to articulate it to someone else. You're going to want to take some time to think about where you are and think about how much longer you have to go. Hopefully, after going through your story summary and your topic summary, you have a better idea of what needs to be shot because you've decided what the story is. You've made a clear decision about what the story is, and you know how you're going to get it. And then you can go into detail about, based on where I am, this is how much longer I have to go. This is what we're waiting for, the contest or the carnival or whatever event that you may be following happens on this date, and then we're going to shoot for a year after that or 6 months after that. and then this is when we plan on finishing. We're anticipating 8 months for post-production. We're anticipating a year and a half for post-production, whatever it is for you. Artistic approach is the next section. It says, describe your creative vision for the finished project, its visual look and feel, explain your intended use of cinematic language or any particular artistic approach that informs the storytelling. If applicable, mention any creative elements and assets, interactive elements, new technologies, and non-traditional mediums that you intend to utilize. Explain how these elements will enhance the experience and interaction between viewers and the world of the story. Essentially, what's your cinematic language? How are you telling this story? So we know what you're going to say. This section is about how you're going to say it. Guess what? You don't get extra points for having animation, super crazy graphics, an intense soundtrack, or somebody's going to jump out the screen and choke the audience. If that works for your story, great. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think the most important thing here is not to make it chock full of all of these super high-tech things that you think people want to fund. The most fundable thing is funding a filmmaker who knows what is going to work for their story. If you have a longitudinal story where you're following a college student who's a first generation in his family, and you're going to follow him through his freshman year and then meet up with him his senior year and then meet up with him his first year in his first job and the last year in his first job, and you don't need a VR element. Like what? Like why? The key is saying this is a very intimate story. I plan on spending X amount of time building a rapport with him, but because of what's happening in his life, he feels very claustrophobic right now. So I'm going to shoot it that way. And then when we get to school, we're going to broaden it up a little bit. And then when he gets his first job, we're going to broaden it up a little bit more. That or not. The key is just knowing. And I think that I really want to articulate and be really clear that there are no right and wrong answers here. The only wrong answer is an answer that is wrong for your film. This is not the place to be impressive. This is the place to respect the story you're telling and tell it in the best way that works for the movie that you're making. The next part is audience and distribution. For the distribution and marketing strategy, it says characterize the intended distribution life of your film, specify plans for festivals, theatrical and or community screenings, as well as plans for securing national broadcast and or distribution. This is something nobody knows. Listen, unless you already have distribution place, nobody knows. The point is, what's your strategy? And the key, again, just like the artistic approach, is that you know your film well enough to know where you think it should live. Based on the kind of film that I have, I think its audience is here. Because of that, I'm choosing this distribution strategy. When you're applying for funds early on in production and development, nobody's saying that you have to have secure distribution or haven't figured it out. The key is that you have a plan or you're thinking about it. That's why it's here. It's less for us and more for you. Audience engagement and social impacts is the next section. And it says in parentheses, if applicable. It's not applicable to every film, and it doesn't go for every filmmaker. Every filmmaker doesn't want to have an audience engagement or social impact campaign attached to the film. Some filmmakers live for that, and they need it, and they don't see the point of making a film without having a social impact campaign. So the key is knowing who you are and if your film goes along with your vision for that. The description says, audience engagement is a strategy designed to activate audiences and constituencies toward a specific goal. Not all films are suited for social engagement, but if yours is, what action do you hope for viewers to take after seeing your film? Potential activities could include organizational partnerships, educational guides, targeted stakeholder, community screenings, social media strategies, multi-platform activities, or social change campaigns. Do you have partnerships with organizations in your issue area already? And if so, how are these relationships informing your project development? So the key here is for us to know, or for a funder to know, how are you thinking about these things? Because it can impact the making of your film. So if you have a partnership with an NGO because you guys share a similar mission, the question is, does that impact how you're making your film? And if so, because a lot of these places are art organizations, how is that impacting how you're making your film? The description of this is really clear, and I don't want filmmakers to feel pressured to think that they have to have this. You don't have to have this, but if you do want this, then how you're going to make your film is going to lend itself to your goal. If your goal is awareness, then your film is going to be a film made for a broader audience. If your film is not awareness and your film is targeted toward these congressional screenings, then you want to make sure that the information in your film and the experts that you have in your film have a certain level of access and have a certain level of information that can really pull at what lawmakers are going to want to see. At the end of the day, it's about preparing you to make the best version of your movie and not leaving out things that you need to be thinking about as you're preparing to make your film. The next part is the visual sample. The first part of it is the director's prior work, and the description is the director's previous work, any length of genre is required. If a prior directing sample is not available, you may submit a film you have shot or edited. Alternatively, previous work from a key creative on the team will also be accepted. Note, a directing sample is not required for audience engagement applications, which we're not talking about right now, so don't worry about that part. Describe the sample you have submitted, including its narrative, aesthetic, or communication intentions. Discuss the relevance of the work to your current project, if any. If the current project is a departure from the prior work, how will this film differ? If I'm reading a proposal, I race to read this part. If I'm looking at a film and it looks like it doesn't have any potential, but I look at the directing sample and I see that the filmmaker is likely a filmmaker who's slow to come to the narrative, then I think that there's more potential with this film. Or if it's a fiction film and the filmmaker can really draw the links between how the themes are similar in terms of what they're navigating in their career as a whole, questions they're asking themselves about the world through their films, then it makes a lot of sense. I don't think filmmakers should rush to draw lines that are not there. The key is saying this is a departure from my work because I've grown as a filmmaker in this way. The next section is the current sample or rough cut. The description says provide necessary background and or context for the work in progress. What should reviewers be looking at in your sample? Explain what is present or absent in the sample and how it will differ as a finished film. How is it representative of the intended story, style, subject, or other aspect of this project? If you submitted a rough cut, what additional scenes do you need? And then it gives you an opportunity to leave the links below. I think perhaps this is the most important part of your proposal if you were submitting anything less than a rough cut. If you were submitting a teaser, a trailer, a short work in progress, research footage, a couple of scenes, an assembly, scene selects, anything that's a combination of footage that's not a complete cut with a clear beginning, middle, and end, you really should focus on this because there's so many times I will watch somebody sample and the first thought is, what is this? I see these people and they're cool, but I don't understand what is it you're trying to communicate to me about the story that you're telling. I just see footage. I see people doing things. This is a section where you explain what I'm looking at. So for example, if you're going to have this highly cinematic, very glossy movie, but what I'm looking at is a static interview, go into detail about the fact that this is research footage that I took on my first trip. That's all I have edited together. What I have in the can or what I have already shot but couldn't afford to edit it together or hire an editor or I haven't had time is an entire other scene. This is what's in this other scene. My final film will look and feel like this. This is not representative of my movie. Anything that will give me the context and explain what I'm looking at, how it is different or the same, or how does it represent your film or not. The next section is financial information. It just says describe the strategy for fundraising, the additional funds necessary to complete the project, include all sources and amounts raised to date, clearly distinguish between potential sources of funding and secured amounts. List the status of other sources of funding currently under consideration, whether to be applied for or pending. So essentially, you're going to write a list of everybody you've applied to, and then write people who've given you money, that is secured, and people who you've applied to, that's applied, and people who you're in negotiation with. So that's in negotiation or in process. Funders do get excited about being the first money in. They also get excited about funding film that's had a lot of support. So the key is just tell the truth. And then, of course, you're going to add a comprehensive line item budget. I'm not super strict on budgets. I don't know a lot of funders who are super duper strict on budgets. The key is just to include what you actually need. You actually need to pay yourself. You actually need to really fund for post-production and not play fund for post-production. I don't think it really matters what kind of budget you have, as long as it's inclusive and comprehensive, as long as it has everything from development all the way to post-production. But I will leave an example budget in the description bar just so you have access to one if you don't have one. The next is grant impact. Amount requested. If you were to receive a grant, describe how the funds would be spent. In light of your total budget, how would you use these funds to help move forward with your project? People want to know if they give you money, how it's going to be used, and they want it to be impactful. Nobody wants to give you money and it's going to go towards postage stamps. And the last thing is contact information. Just make sure it's your real contact information. That's the entire Sundance Institute Documentary Film Fund Proposal Checklist. Everybody has different qualifications, but this is what I want you to understand about the checklist is it's not just for one organization. These are things you need to be thinking about. Even when you're not applying for funding, the more you have these things in order, the more you're thinking about your story and your narrative and your synopsis, your funding strategy, your artistic approach. If you haven't even thought about an artistic approach, don't pick up a camera because documentary is an art form. Funders and audiences are becoming really sophisticated about the way documentaries look and feel. And it doesn't all have to be slick and sexy, but it should be intentional. You should have a plan. With that said, here's your homework. I want you, if you are in the process of making a documentary, even if you've already done this a million times, I want you to take some time and go through this proposal checklist and answer all of the questions from beginning to end. Given the conversation we just had, I really want you to try to be more vulnerable this time, more personal this time. Pay special attention to how high your stakes are and whether you're able to, at the very least, discover a potential beginning, middle, and end for your movie. Okay, that's all I have for this week. I will see you guys next week where we will be talking about career envy. Okay, talk to you guys soon. Bye. Again, you can send us a message. Just look us up on Facebook, Story Consulting Services, or go to facebook.com/Story Consulting Services, and then just send us a message through Messenger. That is all I have for today. But until next time, it's been real. Thank you for listening to this episode of Storyteller Therapy and Investing in You. Comment your thoughts or questions down below. Learn more about our labs, services, and support at atlantafilmproject.com. Stick around for the next episode. See you in a few minutes.